Well, the world's never lacking interesting moments or interesting markets or interesting politics, and we're in a blender of all those right now, as per usual. I don't know if many of the mainstream investors or the media noticed that we crossed the 21 trillion mark recently in the deficit. But then again, it seems like deficits just don't matter. We can just continue to raise the debt level. The central bank is going from an easing policy to a tightening policy, at least until things get bad. So Fed balance sheets are expanding and contracting. Deficits are growing massively. I know you've been working on and are working on right now some work on the kind of the relation between the deficit and growth and what kind of real growth we're getting. I'm curious to see what you're seeing in that kind of examination.
Well, what's interesting is when most people talk about the deficit, they kind of think, well, debt's bad, especially if you can't pay it off, which is true. And obviously the government can't. But I don't think they realize just how powerful it's been in boosting our economy. Now, you might say that's a fake boost, and I would agree, but it has been powerful in boosting our economy. In the last 10 years, I did some quick math called research, where I just took how much the economy grew each year, anywhere from 600 billion to 800 billion, and I subtracted the amount of the deficit for that year. And I found something fascinating. There was only 1 year in the past 10 years where we've had positive growth outside of what was caused by the deficit. So it's stunning. And I'm doing some more work. People might say, "Oh my God, that's we've seen big deficits before in the 40s and 50s. I mean, the 50s and 60s." So I looked at the first 5 years of the 50s, 50 to 55, and 60 to 65, and found just what you really would expect is no, we had a lot of positive growth every year. Adjust for the deficit, all
and
that.
Not just
tremendous,
debt-driven growth.
not debt-driven growth at all.
Right.
Very much non-debt-driven growth. So I'm going to put some numbers out on that in newsletter. But it's a big deal. It's not just debt is bad. It's actually been a core part of our economy we're now dependent on.
Right.
That's not good.
Right. No, as soon as I've been in New York recently, and there's a lot of nervousness. Maybe it's about policy by tweet in the Middle East or Syria, and how much more embroiled we're going to get with boots on the ground and these issues.
China, trade issues.
Trade issues, 50 billion, 100 billion here and there, tossed around like bullies in a playground. These sovereign leaders acting like children in a lot of ways. But that's a long story. But also the VIX moves this year have been extraordinary. That's good reason to be nervous, but it's amazing this basic notion of debt and growth isn't a reason to be nervous enough. And I think it's fascinating. When people see growth, they're agnostic as to why, as long as they're seeing growth, but they're not seeing the longer term consequences of that.
So you're saying they're not nervous for
the right reasons,
right? But you are seeing some nervousness.
Oh, absolutely. And certainly China and the Middle East and volatility in the VIX are reasons to be nervous. But what's amazing is you're missing the forest through the trees a little bit, the trees through the forest. That this question of a $21 trillion debt, we spent $800 billion really quickly and faster than was anticipated. And then both sides of the aisle are giving each other pork to spend on military or on other entitlements. So this idea that you can just put everything on a big national Visa card just never stops.
Well, and when the Congressional Budget Office came out with its new estimates for deficits over the next few years, the market did react. And I think that is part of that underlying nervousness. We're heading to $1 trillion deficits for the next 10 years and could be much bigger. That's with a lot of positive assumptions like no recessions, no inflation.
Right.
But I agree. I think that we're going to see more of these what you just said, tweet issues, other issues, trade issues. I think it's going to make for a less stable market over the next few months.
It is fascinating. Yeah, they literally are in this new budget with these new tax cuts and these new revenue models, which are pretty anemic. They really think that to make this work, we have to grow our way past this problem. So as long as we have these cuts and revenue cuts, but it's okay, we're going to have growth higher, 20% higher than the last 10 years. That is a massive assumption. I think it's a relatively artificial assumption.
Think about it. Just like Congressional Budget Office thinks no recessions the next 10 years.
Really? And we're having to compete with the last 10 years, which was the unprecedented amount of low interest rates and money printing, which we can't duplicate for the next 10. So it's really fascinating to make that assumption.
Nervousness.
So we'll see how this market reacts. But
for the short-term reasons and the long-term reasons, a little bit.
Absolutely.
All right. Very good.
Great.